That's the part that still bothers me, years later. If it had been some rotting mansion with boarded windows and a cemetery out back, we would have laughed, taken pictures, and left before dark. But this place, this was a vacation rental. It was on a real listing with real reviews. Families had stayed there. Couples. Cozy, one review said. Perfect fall getaway. We were 4 friends from Pittsburgh, me, my girlfriend Tara, and our friends Mason and Jules. It was late September, the kind of weekend where the city still holds on to summer, but the wind starts carrying that dry, leaf crackle smell. We wanted trees, quiet, and a break from our phones without saying it out loud. Mason found the listing while half asleep, sent the link to our group chat, and by lunchtime, we'd split the cost. The house was outside a town called Wellsboro, Pennsylvania, near the Pine Creek Gorge. People call it the Grand Canyon of Pennsylvania, which is a little dramatic, but the area really does drop away into these steep, wooded walls that make you feel small. The rental was described as a countryside home on 10 private acres, and the address was off Route 6, down a long gravel lane. When we arrived, it was already late afternoon. Our car kicked up dust that hung in the air like smoke and settled on the ferns at the roadside. The sky was pale and high, that washed-out blue you get right before the light turns golden. The house appeared gradually through the trees, not looming, just there. White siding, green shutters, a porch swing, a metal mailbox by the lane with the house number stenciled in black. No neighbors in sight, but that's what we wanted. We unloaded groceries and sleeping bags like it was any other weekend. Tara opened cabinets and narrated what she found. Mismatched mugs, an ancient waffle iron, a jar of cinnamon that looked older than all of us. The air inside smelled like lemon cleaner over something older dry wood and faint mildew, like a basement that had been aired out. Jules walked from room to room taking pictures for Instagram until she remembered she wasn't going to be that person, and put her phone away with a dramatic sigh. Mason found the guest book on a side table near the fireplace. He called us over like he'd discovered buried treasure. "Look at this," he said, flipping through. People write full paragraphs in these. Tara leaned on his shoulder. I stood behind them, reading over their heads. Mostly it was what you'd expect. Thanks for the stay, loved the hiking, saw deer, great place to unplug. Then Mason paused. He tapped one entry with his finger. It wasn't long, and the handwriting was shaky. If you hear whistling at night, don't answer. Lock the doors. Jules laughed too loudly. Okay, that's clearly somebody trying to be creepy. Mason grinned, but his eyes stayed on the page. Or somebody being serious. Tara shut the book gently, like closing a lid. We're not doing this. We're not letting a guest book freak us out. She was right. We all agreed. Still, I remember the sensation of that sentence sitting in my chest, like a coin swallowed wrong. Outside, the sun dipped behind the trees earlier than it would have in the city. The forest thickened into a dark wall. Sound changed, too. At home, there's always something traffic. A siren, a dog barking, someone's TV through the wall. Here, when you stopped talking, it was as if the world held its breath. We cooked pasta, ate at the little dining table, and opened a bottle of cheap wine. Mason put on a playlist that started with upbeat road trip music and ended, somehow, with slow acoustic songs that made the room feel smaller. The house creaked, but old houses do that. The pipes thunked when someone ran the sink. We joked about ghosts and made ourselves laugh, intentionally, like laughter could nail something down. Around 10, the wind picked up. It pushed tree branches against the side of the house with a soft, repetitive brushing. Jules went out onto the porch swing with a blanket. She said she wanted to see the stars. The rest of us followed a minute later, each pretending we weren't a little nervous about the dark. The night sky was insane. No city glow. The Milky Way looked like spilled salt. The air smelled like leaves and damp earth. We sat there, warm from wine, talking about nothing important, when the first odd thing happened. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't footsteps. It was whistling. A few notes, clear and delicate, drifting from somewhere out in the trees. Tara sat up. Do you hear that? Mason did the thing where he tries to identify a sound by looking at it. That's a bird, he said automatically. At night? Jules asked. The whistling came again. Same notes. Then silence. We stared into the black beyond the porch light. The forest looked like a solid shape, like a curtain. Then the whistling happened a third time. Closer, or maybe we just listened harder. I'm not an outdoors expert. I know owls hoot, coyotes yip, and branches creak, but this didn't sound like an animal. It sounded like a person, trying to get someone's attention without shouting. Mason half laughed. Okay, that's weird. Jules stood up. Nope, I'm done being outside. She went in first. Tara followed. Probably someone's on a nearby property, she said, but her voice was tight. Mason stayed a second longer with me, both of us staring out into the dark like we could force it to make sense. Guest book, he said quietly. I wanted to joke. I wanted to shrug. Instead, I said, let's lock up. We checked the doors and windows like we were performing a ritual. Front door deadbolt, back door chain, the kitchen window latch, the little window above the sink that barely opened. When we finally went to bed, it wasn't with the cozy, sleepy vacation feeling we'd expected. It was like we were laying down inside a question we couldn't answer. The bedrooms were upstairs. Tara and I took the room with the quilted bedspread. Mason took the room across the hall. Jules took the smaller room at the end. The house settled as we turned off lights. The darkness inside was thick. Tara fell asleep quicker than I did. I lay on my back listening. At some point, maybe midnight, maybe later, the whistling came again. Not outside, inside. It was faint, like it was coming from far away, but it was unmistakable. The same notes carried through the house. My skin went cold all at once. I held my breath, straining. The whistling stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy, as if the house itself was listening back. I nudged Tara, whispering her name. She made a sleepy noise and turned over. I sat up. The room was almost black, but moonlight outlined the window. Nothing moved. No shadows slid beneath the door. Then, from somewhere below, I heard something else. A soft, slow sound. The front door handle being tried. Not rattled violently. Not yanked. Just turned carefully, once, like someone didn't want to make noise. I froze so hard my neck hurt. The handle turned again. Then the deadbolt, or maybe the chain, held. Whoever it was stopped. A minute passed. Then a creak from downstairs, like a foot shifting on the porch boards. My mind tried to fill in explanations: wrong house, drunk neighbor, raccoon. But raccoons don't turn handles. And a wrong house doesn't explain the whistling. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Tara fully. I took my phone, but there was no service. It showed one empty bar that felt like a cruel joke. I eased the bedroom door open and stepped into the hall. The upstairs was darker than the room. The air felt colder out there, as if the walls held on to night. Mason's door cracked open across the hall. His face appeared, pale in the dark. You heard it? He whispered. I nodded. We moved together to the top of the stairs. From there we could see a sliver of the downstairs, just the shape of the hallway, and beyond it, the faint rectangle of the front door window. Nothing moved, no flashlight beam, no silhouette. Then, very softly, from the direction of the front door, came a sound that made my stomach drop. A voice, not loud, not angry. It was someone speaking in a normal tone, as if they were standing close to the door and didn't want to shout. "Hello?" Mason's hand gripped the banister. His knuckles looked almost white. The voice came again, slightly different, like it was testing the word. "Hello?" It didn't sound like the same person twice. It sounded asterisk off asterisk, like a recording playing through a cheap speaker or someone imitating what they'd heard other people say. I suddenly remembered the guestbook sentence and hated myself for it. "If you hear whistling at night, don't answer." Mason mouthed, asterisk Don single quotes T dot asterisk. We stood there in the dark, two grown men terrified of a word. It would have been so easy to call down. "Who is it?" That's what normal people do. You check. You engage. But something about that voice made engagement feel like stepping onto thin ice. The silence stretched. The front porch creaked again. Then the voice said, "I need help." The phrase was flat, like it had been practiced. My throat tightened. My heart pounded so loud, I was sure it could be heard downstairs. Behind me, a door opened. Tara stepped into the hall, hair messy, eyes unfocused. "What's going on?" She whispered. I put a finger to my lips. She followed my gaze down the stairs. We stood as a group at the top step, staring into the downstairs darkness, like it was a mouth. "I need help," the voice repeated. Jules' door opened at the end of the hall. Her face appeared, wide-eyed. She saw us and came quickly, her socks silent on the wood floor. Mason leaned close to me and whispered, "We should call 911. "No service," I whispered back. Jules' voice was barely audible. "Is it a prank?" I almost answered her, but before I could, the voice downstairs changed again. It was closer to the door window now, like whoever it was had stepped right up to the glass. And it said Tara's name. Not "hey" or "hello" this time. Just her name, spoken softly, in a tone that made my blood feel like it was moving wrong in my veins. "Tara." Tara's body went rigid beside me. She made a tiny sound, like a breath caught. "Don't," Mason hissed. The voice said it again. Tara. There was no reason for a stranger to know her name, unless they'd heard it earlier. On the porch, while we were talking, while we assumed the dark was empty. Jules covered her mouth with both hands. Tara's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. She shook her head once, slowly, like she was refusing to believe her own ears. From downstairs, the voice tried again, like it was rearranging what it had learned. "Tara," it said, then paused and added, "Come here." It wasn't a command. It wasn't a threat. It was worse. It sounded like someone trying to sound familiar, like a child mimicking an adult. I grabbed Tara's wrist and pulled her away from the stairs. Mason backed up with us. Jules stood frozen for a second, then followed, almost tripping over her own feet. We moved into the hallway, away from the stairwell, like distance could help, like not being seen would help. Tara's hands shook. She whispered, "How does it know?" "She," I said, because I didn't want the question to become real. Then came the whistling again, not from outside, from the bottom of the stairs. The notes floated up through the house, delicate and slow. I don't know what snapped in me. Fear, probably. The kind of fear that stops being a feeling and becomes a decision. "Bathroom," I whispered. Now, it was the only room upstairs with a lock. We moved quickly, quietly, like if we made too much noise, the house would notice. We got into the bathroom and shut the door. Mason locked it. Tara turned on the light, then immediately turned it off again, as if light would make us visible. We stood in darkness, packed together, listening. The whistling stopped. We heard slow footsteps on the downstairs hardwood. Then the sound of something else, the soft scrape of fingers on the wall, moving along it, like someone feeling for the base of the stairs. Mason's breathing was loud in the tiny room. Jules clutched Tara's arm so hard, her fingers must have left marks. Then the footsteps reached the first stair. The old wood creaked under weight. A second creak. A third. I wanted to throw up. I wanted to scream. I wanted to do anything that wasn't standing in the dark waiting. Then, very close now, near the top of the stairs, the voice spoke again. But it wasn't trying to imitate us anymore. It spoke in a whispery, amused tone, like it had finally gotten what it wanted. "I can hear you," Tara gasped. Jules let out a tiny sob. Mason shook his head rapidly, his eyes wild in the darkness, silently begging us not to make a sound. We held our breath. The hallway floor creaked, slow, careful. Then the bathroom doorknob moved. It turned slightly, met the lock, and stopped. For a second, everything was still. Then the voice said, right outside the door, almost pleasantly, "Open it." The doorknob turned again, harder. The lock held. The voice didn't get angry. It didn't shout. It chuckled softly, like a person entertained by a stubborn jar lid. And then it did something I still hear sometimes in my dreams. It whistled those same notes, right against the bathroom door, close enough that the sound vibrated through the wood. Mason put a hand over his own mouth. I felt Tara trembling against my shoulder. There was a long pause. Then footsteps moved away down the hall. We didn't relax. We couldn't. We listened as the steps returned to the stairs. One creak, then another, descending slowly. When the downstairs quieted again, it took my brain a moment to accept that it had actually left the upstairs. Jules whispered, "What is it doing?" No one answered, because no answer made sense.